G'day friends, my name is James of Burke Creative and welcome to another month of ArtSnacks Box Freestyle, where we take the supplies from the May 2022 ArtSnacks Plus box, experiment with them to within an inch of their lives and then hopefully create a masterpiece for the hashtag ArtSnacks Challenge. Today's fun fact is, this will be the last time you'll see me here with this long hair. I am cutting it off after 2 long years of growing it for absolutely no reason. I've decided that I'm going to cut it off before a big trip my husband and I have planned in June. So I am going to chop it all off and donate it to Locks of Love. So take it all in, it'll be commemorated here forever. This video. Thank you for being a part of my hair journey. Anyway, let's get into the box and see what we've got to play with today. Here is the ArtSnacks Plus box from May 2022. Here's everything inside. Let's unwrap that green burrito and take a closer look. First up in the Plus box, we have the Marabou Graphics Aqua Paper Pad, size A4, which is 11.7 by 8.3 inches. We also have the Mona Lisa Brush Shaper in the Plus box. We'll be using the Viviva Color Sheets Original Set of 16, as well as a King Art Premium White Nylon 7950 Series brush, a round, and size 1. A Kuretake-ZIG Clean Color Real Brush Pen, I got the color Moss Green, and a Pentel Arts Brush Tip Sign Pen in this light pink color. We have our snack and sticker. Let's set everything up to play today. The first thing I noticed when experimenting with this month's box was that everything was water soluble. The color sheets are obviously kind of a dry, flat version of watercolor that we can activate with water, but the brush pens are also water-based, which makes them water reactive. I'm not going to say every water-based pen or pencil? Yeah, sure. Watercolor pencils, maybe. I'm not going to say all of the water-based mediums, are watercolor when you put water with them, because that's not necessarily true. Depending on the makeup of the product, you're going to get a different reaction with the water, but both of these brush pens, the ZIG Real Brush Pen and the Pentel Arts Pen, both almost fully disappear and fully blend away with the water. That is also kind of dependent on the color and the paper. Some colors are a lot more staining, but that green, that moss green, and that light pink weren't very staining colors, and that just means if you had a more staining color, like sometimes bright blues can be quite staining. When you put that down on the page and use water, you're most likely going to see the marks you first made, and you won't be able to fully scrub those away. You can kind of avoid that by dampening the paper and then using your pen, but you will get kind of a blurry ink bleed effect. Anyway, we're getting way off topic here. You see I've already swatched out all of those colors, and now I'm dipping that brush pen in. They're both water-based mediums, like the water-based ink in that brush pen is going to react with that water-reactive watercolor. So it is essentially kind of like cleaning the tip of your brush pen, but you do get this really fabulous ombre effect from one color to another, that really nice smooth transition, and you can do the same thing with the Real Brush. The Real Brush and the Pentel brush pen, even though they're both brush pens, function really differently. That Pentel Arts pen there, the pink one, has a really hard, it's flexible, but it's a really hard tip, and there's no individual bristles to that tip, which makes for a really different drawing experience than the ZIG Clean Color. The Clean Color is like having a paintbrush where it's already full of a colored ink, in this case that moss green. So the bristles will separate, and I really love that because especially on these cold pressed watercolor papers, or I don't know if this one is, I think it is, but any watercolor paper that has a lot of texture, you can get a really fabulous dry brush effect, which I just really enjoy. It's a bit of a personal preference, the dry brushing, if people enjoy that or not, but especially when you're using watercolor, I find it really nice to mix that dry brush effect with some really loose watercolor, because they kind of contrast each other really well. Anyway, moving on to what I thought would be the most appropriate thing to draw, seeing as it is May, and a lot of people celebrate May by doing a 31-day mermaid challenge. If you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, every May for I don't know how many years now, but it's been a few years. I've done this a couple of times. There is a challenge to draw a mermaid a day throughout May, and I think the challenge was created by Tom Bancroft, who is a Disney animator, or illustrator, a Disney artist, let's say that. And yeah, I've done it a couple of times before. I'll have a chat to you when we do our final piece about challenges and the way that I've felt about them and the way that I feel about them now, having done a bunch of them. But for the most part, I thought it would be good to do a mermaid because A, I love them and I'm always doing them, but B, most of these if not everything in here, like I said, was water reactive. It's a water-based or water reactive art supply, and it would really lend itself well to drawing an underwater scene, since I actually find it really hard to control all of these mediums once the water comes out. The brush itself is really, really tiny, a size 1, and there's a super good snap to it, so it's a really good detail brush because it will keep its shape, but the idea of trying to control all of these different water-based mediums once the water hits the paper was stressing me out a little bit, so I decided to kind of lean into something I felt comfortable with. I know we've talked about this before, that you don't always have to challenge yourself to do something new that you've never tried and, you know, succeed at everything every single time. I guess that'll lead into my challenge talk throughout the end of the video. But I did think, you know what, I'm just going to stick with something that I think I can have a good time with here. And the real challenge for me was to do quite a large piece with a small brush. I would typically just choose the size of brush that would make the most sense for the size of the piece that I'm working on. And I would never really choose a brush that small. Even in doing details, especially with watercolor, I don't fuss that much with them. So using such a tiny brush was a big challenge to know what areas to activate with water, where to lay all that pigment, how much do I think I could actually control, because I will usually let watercolor go nuts. You see on the screen here, like, I don't care what it blends into, where it blends into. It's always a bit of a mystery to me how it's going to end up, and I love that fact about it. But using such a tiny brush, I was a bit more tempted to try and control it and place all of that watercolor where I knew it could go if I was gonna be a bit more careful with it. And that does change up your experience. You know, what I'm used to is letting go and just letting it do its thing, but I just became a lot more tempted to clean it up with that small brush, which did give me a bit of a challenge in the actual ArtSnacks challenge at the end. I'm gonna point out here that what I wish would have happened was this exact little piece. I wish I could have drawn this for my final one. In fact, there was a point where I thought, I think I'm gonna cut this one out and just paste it on top and hope that nobody notices. But I want to talk to you through it as well, because, you know, it's normal. We sometimes in our messy sketches and our thought processes come up with, you know, little drawings or illustrations and paintings that are better than the thing we spend hours on trying to make neat and perfect. So I think that's a good kind of lesson in there. But here is the final experimentation. We'll get set up for the final piece. The first big struggle I had with this piece was trying to cover the background. I wanted it to be a full underwater scene, so I decided to spritz the paper just to make sure that it would be easy to kind of push all of the watercolor around. It took a while, but we got there. I really flooded the paper, and I probably, if I wanted to keep it flat, I should have taped it to something hard and flat. I do have a clipboard that sometimes I use for that, or I could have just taped it to the table. Never mind though, because there is a trick. You can spritz the back of the page, hopefully there's nothing on it for you, and then I just use the back of my hand to rub that water into the entire back side of the page. It will reactivate all of those fibers that have warped in the paper, and you can close the paper pad, put it under a stack of books, and let it flatten out. Just let it dry itself. For me, it took about 5 to 10 minutes. And then when you open it back up, it should be mostly flat again. I got it completely flat the first time. The second time I did it, some of the warping was much more intense, and I couldn't straighten that out. It was okay, because I kind of cut the paper up anyway. But yeah, you can totally re-flatten your page. You could just avoid it by taping it down, but I didn't do that. So we're getting into the piece here. I used the Pentel Arts Brush Pen to sketch the whole piece out. I knew that because it was water reactive, most of these sketchy lines would kind of disappear once I added watercolor to it. So it was mostly just a quick sketch with that pen, and it is a wonderful pen to get a varied line width. It looks very animated, like very comic book style, these variations in line width, and you just achieve that by changing the pressure when you're drawing. If you lighten up on your pressure, you'll get some really beautiful thin lines. If you press a little bit heavier, I'm very heavy-handed, so you'll end up with a lot more bold lines, and that's typically the look that I get because I can't help myself. I've got a very heavy hand. I then used the color sheets and started plotting in all of the different tones that I wanted to add to the piece. Here I'm going to just quickly mention, I guess, my brief overview of what happened here, and if I'm going to give myself a critique, which I do often, I'm just going to share you kind of the thought process that I had through that, and then we'll talk about challenges. I did not love how this turned out, and I can put it down to one particular problem that stemmed from just an idea that we have sometimes as artists. So I think it's good to kind of point it out. I am not unhappy with it, as in, like, I don't think it's terrible, but I just don't love it as much because I actually really loved the little experimentation piece, and I'll put them kind of side by side in our last few frames where we just look at the final pieces. Like I said, I don't hate this, but with that teeny tiny brush, I had noticed that it was a bit of a struggle for me to not want to include all these details. And because I have this idea that when I'm doing the experimentation with all the supplies, I don't actually have to finish anything, I was a lot quicker, a lot freer, and a lot looser, and I did a lot less. When I go to do my final piece, my brain usually switches to the part of, okay, this is where you have to put all your effort in because this has to be the good one. Now, just that thought alone and the idea that I could actually get a lot more details in with the brush made me add all the details I never added the first time, and also added a ton more layers than I did the first time. I think the first one I only went over twice, and this one had about 6 or 7 layers of color on it. Now, it may not seem like it's going to change the effect that much, but it really does. The more you add to something, the less likely it is going to look very effortless and carefree, and especially if you're going to add a ton of details, like all these scales I did on the tail, those are details that I did not add the first time, partly because I didn't even draw the whole mermaid the first time. So I think that had a lot to do with why this, to me, looked really overworked. I don't think it looks terrible, but I'm just not as in love with it as I am my original piece. And it always serves as a good reminder to me that just because you spend a lot of time and energy and effort doing something, and because you work at it a ton, doesn't necessarily make it a better end result. Sometimes it is absolutely okay to do a whole lot less and enjoy a much simpler and freer approach, which, you know, I would know that and I should know that, but it always bears repeating. And I myself, I mean, we all have that piece of advice, right? That we just need to remind ourselves sometimes, especially someone like me. I'm a more is more kind of person. And you see here, I'm trying to fix what I didn't like about the mermaid being overworked by overworking the entire piece. I thought, you know what would save this? More. The same thing that I think didn't save it in the first place. I mean, don't even question my brain at this point. But I did have a fun time doing it, and I think one of the most beautiful effects, because I always like to find something I do like about it, I think one of the nicest effects was all of these supplies being water reactive meant that I could just blur and blend everything and have all of these really beautiful watery effects, which for an underwater scene, I think are definitely a nice added touch. So I will say that's something that I do love about it. I mentioned challenges like Mermaid earlier. We're also really familiar with Inktober. There are a lot of challenges you can do on social media, and if you're doing one this month or you're going to do one later in the year, I wish you well on that journey. I've participated in many challenges online throughout the past few years. I don't do much of them anymore. I accidentally fell into a really bad trap of having an achievement complex, which is not the right reason to jump into challenges. So my one piece of advice, if you want to take any from me, call it wisdom if you will, just always identify what it is you want to get out of the challenge, and then when you know your why, it's a whole lot easier to go through it. And I actually think it's okay to jump in and jump out, and I think it's okay to do it just because you want to be a part of it. It's fun to be a part of something, and I think that's completely valid as well. I don't think you always have to learn everything. I did Inktober because I wanted to learn grayscale and ink, but then I did it afterwards because I just wanted to do a community project with people that were in my community online. So there can be a bunch of different reasons why you do it. I wish you well nonetheless. I think they can be really fun, but just don't fall into the trap that I did where you feel like you had to achieve everything, because that's not a fun way to do it. However, this is the final piece. Like I said, that one was my favorite. I think she's beautiful. Still really proud of my final piece. You can see I cropped it into a nice landscape kind of panoramic view. Thank you for watching the video. Have fun in Mermaid if you're doing it. I'll see you in a second. There we go, the final piece for today's ArtSnacks challenge. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you would like to join ArtSnacks, you can do so using the code James10 at checkout for 10% off your purchase. And also, please don't forget to share your work with us in the Mix community and on social media using the hashtag ArtSnacks Challenge. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye.